it can be so challenging to deal with certain illnesses or challenges in general. But what if there is another side to it, which actually helps you to improve other things? Now, today I wrote this blog post about EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, basically hypermobility, and then some extra on the neurological field, so things to do with breath, hypertension, heart rate, things like that. And the voice. Why the voice? Because I am going to a speech therapist lately, and the combination of going to the speech therapist, but also my allergies, so my mast cells go haywire. And if they go haywire, you can recognize this because the skin gets red and you get those little bumps on there and they start to itch. You might have seen them or actually experienced them when you had a mosquito bite or something. Well, in my case, I can get that from touching something or eating something. And it's all basically linked to the whole EDS thing. So the ligaments in my system are not up to par. And that causes me to have difficulty to figure out how to stand up, how to walk, so how to get moving. So usually I use my braces nowadays, my knee braces. They're quite big actually. So they cover part of my calf, then my knees, and then they go all the way up to my thighs. So I can just put my hands in the pockets of my trousers, but the ones below, because I usually wear cargo pants, well, those are covered by the braces. So then you have sort of like an idea. But I learned quite a few things, and actually today I realized something is exciting. So to give you just a little bit of an idea about the blog post, it's about the combination of neurodivergence and EDS, so the hypermobility, so being too flexible in your joints, sometimes they call it double jointed. The mast cell disease, so me being extra vulnerable for certain foods, or, well, basically when we talk about pollen season, then when the birch trees are blossoming, that's when I get short of breath. And apparently the body goes haywire in connecting certain foods with the trigger for the birch pollen. So when it comes, for instance, to raw apple, I cannot eat raw apple because then my throat closes up. Now, actually, in my case, and that's a bit different from normal allergies, it's not because the throat swells up, it's actually because my esophagus cramps up. And that's where it gets interesting. So I've been to the speech therapist now 2, maybe 3 times. And she wanted me to do this exercise, which is sort of like a bubble exercise, but the straw is like twice as thick and you have to do it with less water. Well, this could be the amount of water as long as you put it like this, but she wants me to try it with this amount of water. So I tried it with the bigger straw, and no such luck. And here's the thing, because around the same time I was dealing with the food allergies, I've been switching to new medication for a while now. I actually got 2 kinds of medication that I could use. One is to make sure that the mast cells no longer go haywire. And the other one is to make sure that the substances themselves cannot trigger the stomach lining, if I say it correctly. So one is protective and the other basically solves or stops the hive. And what I noticed at some point was when I had eaten something which caused my esophagus to clamp up, I took medication. At some point, I could feel that the hives or the itching that was getting less, but the cramp was still there. So what I started doing was eating little tiny bits of food, but then the right bits of food. And of course, the medication stopped me from reacting to the food, but this was food I could actually eat. So I ate it bit by bit, and because of it, my body was forced to relax again, which was nice, so I could finally swallow again. I told this to the speech therapist. I said to her, like, well, you know what? What if I were to use that medication right now? So it prevents the esophagus from cramping, because that's the result of those same mast cells going haywire as well. So we did so. And then she saw me with the Starbucks cup and she said, you know what? What if we're going to use this cup instead of the other one? And I was like, okay. So different straw, less water, and it worked. So at some point she had me stand up, and it was so funny because finally I got to feel all these vibrations. I could literally feel how, because you have to breathe in, and then when breathing out, that's when you make a sound like I really have to move this around. So I'm still learning, but depending on which note I use, you can hear something resonating as well, because, well, I've got these little lumps on my vocal cords. I think they call them differently, but it's sort of like a callus because of silent reflux. That's the other part of the story. But when I did those exercises, I suddenly could feel that at first it started to resonate here. And then when the remainder of the air had to go out, because I wasn't running out of air, because you take one breath and then basically you make the sound based on the airflow. So I could feel it shift all the way down to the pelvic area. So if you pay attention to your breathing, then there are a lot of people who only use this part, but the goal is to eventually use your entire abdomen area. So that's all the way, including the pelvic area, which is a major part when it comes to core stability. And, well, your breath is also part of all of this. So a while ago, she said to me, I can't help you, but I have heard a little crack in your voice, so go and have it checked out. So I went to this specialist. He specialized in the skin, mast cell disease, and the allergies. And yes, he could help me. So he had someone put this little tube down my nose with a camera in it, and that's how they saw that my vocal cords actually didn't close, and that I had these little lumps I think they call them nodules on there. And so that's what I shared with the speech therapist. And I said, well, you heard right, because they found this exact thing. And we also had concluded something else. I can talk without getting out of breath, but I cannot blow for a long period of time, like when you have to do when there's a traffic stop and police want to see if you've been drinking or not. And I mean drinking alcohol. And well, that's something I can't do. I can't do that for a long period of time. That's what I ran into with the big straw as well. And now she had come up with something else. And I also had discovered that when I'm singing, I actually don't have that problem. I can talk to you, I can talk into the camera, talk for a long while, and I can also sing without getting out of breath. So those are two good things. So that's why she started not only with the straw. So basically the technique is like you put it like in there, you breathe in. Well, I couldn't even do it 3 times as short as what I just did. And this is actually quite an amount of water. So then she had me stand in front of the mirror and she had me do the other things, singing the mm and the mum and the moom and the mom. So, like I said, at some point I discovered that I could feel it resonate through my body. So the first part, when it came to the whole nodules on my vocal cords, I looked up what it could be. And one of the things they said was it can be the result of acid reflux. Now, I do know that I have it from time to time, but when we are talking about it, you can have like this big, well, you know, that it comes up and you taste it in your mouth. So say like a wave of fluid, but there's also another option, and I didn't know about this, and that's called the silent throat reflux. And it's they call it LPR. I'm speaking right now my cheat sheet, laryngopharyngeal reflux. So one part describes the vocal cords, the other part describes the throat, the opening of the throat. And basically these are sort of like fumes, I call them fumes, which basically come up. And because my vocal cords don't close, it can actually land on my vocal cords. And the way that I notice is, again, a little different, I guess, from most people. Although it's when I describe it to people who know about it, they say, oh yeah. And that's, I feel it at the back of my shoulder blade. And apparently that has to do with, yes, cramping of the muscles. Now, if I didn't believe it, I actually went to a beauty specialist a few days ago after I had a night where it actually really hurt, that shoulder blade. And when she started massaging me, and it was the first time, so I was like, oh, she's massaging this area, kind of nice. Then she touched the shoulder blade, and it was really hurtful. And I was like, oh yeah, that feels like a bruise. And that's because, well, it had been cramping the day before, so it made sense. I was like, okay. Now, if we combine all these things, then I have learned to be more aware of what I'm eating, what I'm doing, which medication to take when, but also how to use these vibrations, so how to use my voice to improve certain things. Now, in the blog post, I also mentioned neurodivergence. Why? Because apparently there has been a study that has been done, and I already heard so from the university in San Diego because they did research on it, and people who are neurodivergent, so they're on the spectrum or ADHD or they're gifted or both or all three of it, of those things, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the brain is wired differently, so the responses are differently, and they can be a little bit later. They can be without emotion because things are seen as factual, or they can be very elaborate, just to name a few things. One of the things, for instance, I realized is I know I have trouble not using my hands. I talk with my hands a lot. And we call this fidgeting, not the talking with the hands, but actually doing something like playing with a pen or like following lines on the table. And this weekend, I was doing the same thing. And I realized that while I was talking to a friend and I was really listening, I was actually following the lines on the table. And it was like, you know, two triangles who met up in the middle. And I did it with the back of a spoon. And then I put it down. And before I knew it, I was tapping on the music. When the music was over, that a particular song, then I realized I was doing something else. And all the way through, not just during dinner, but also when I was driving back home, I realized that I was constantly doing something. And apparently the fidgeting in this case has to do with regulating the system, the body, in order to be able to focus. Today, I talked to Google AI. I'm not sure why people use ChatGPT. I'm very content with Google AI. And Google AI and I were talking about music. So I was listening to a certain song, and it's got this certain vibe. And I literally can feel it all the way down in the lower part of my abdomen. And I was like, how does this work? So I asked about it, and then I came up with some other songs where I have that same experience. And they all had some things in common, which was the tone setting, but also the way the notes were placed. So we have a major scale and a minor scale. And so it has to do with have notes in between or not. And apparently I respond to that. So there is a certain frequency, and people can actually respond to music in general. It can have an effect on their breathing, on their heart, a number of things. I never heard people talk about this, but it does make sense that a lot of songs which are meant to trigger some feelings are written in that specific range, in that specific frequency. So I named a number of songs we went there, all same frequency. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then later on, I said, but here's the thing. I have pitch perfect hearing. But due to aging, the little hairs in my ears, inside my ears, they're not as flexible anymore. So the height of the tone is different for me now. So my hearing processes it differently, and that's why my brain comes up with a different tone than I used to have. So when I look at paper, do it purely by hearing, then I have to pull up the note in order to reach that same note. Now, when I am singing along or playing along on the keys or doing Duolingo, then I can actually make the difference between what I'm actually singing and hearing and what I perceive to be the right tone. Basically, that's called neuroplasticity. Your brain can adapt to so many things. But here was the thing. I was like, well, I now, for the first time, can feel the muscles here vibrating and going all the way down, depending on how much air I still have left in my lungs. And I was like, okay, so does that change too? Because that doesn't make sense. So if I always have had a preference for certain frequencies, and I did, and I still do actually, then how does this work? Because if I hear it differently, then is what I'm hearing still the same? Because I know that my hearing has shifted, right? And that's when I realized that if I can just focus on the vibrations I feel in my abdomen, I might actually be able to recalibrate my hearing. Now, isn't that interesting? So whereas my ears give me false information, I can actually learn to reset the whole thing by trusting what I feel resonating in my apps. I think that's pretty cool, just thinking about it. So today I said, okay, I'm going to talk about flexibility and adaptability. And that's why I started with certain challenges can be challenging, but they can also have their advantages. And for me, EDS is not easy. It's kind of hard. Even just finding a specialist who can tell you have EDS seems to be impossible nowadays. And then getting them to listen, because, well, it's about them understanding what I want to get across and me understanding what they want to get across. Well, that's also very hard. And the specialist I went to, well, he has been contradicting himself in the report that he wrote. And so recently I went to my GP again. I said, okay, please file these reports. And then he can see that I actually do have the other version. Both are related. Hypermobility and EDS are basically two things of the same coin. They both have to do with ligaments. It's just about what's going on inside, which causes things to shift. And that's why I also talked about neurodivergent people, because the studies have shown that most neurodivergent people are actually dealing with hypermobility. Well, isn't that interesting? That ligaments can be connected to something which basically is linked to the brain. Now, what I know is a number of them are very creative. And when it comes to music, but also creativity, basically you have to use both your hands. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the reasons that things are differently, because when you use both hands, you have to use both halves of the brain, and then they create these tiny connections between the left and the right part of the brain in order to function together. Just a thought I just had, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some truth to it. Having said so, when it comes to flexibility and adaptability, I constantly have to shift because of what I can do and what I cannot do. And what I've noticed is when I'm thinking about certain things and I pay attention to certain things, then it all seems to line up. So for instance, going to the speech therapist, I was dealing with the silent reflux, and this got linked to what she had me examined for. So basically the nodules on my vocal cords. And then I realized when I was actually experiencing this, so I was experimenting with medication, which I'm allowed to do, just to be on the safe side. But more importantly, I also started to recognize when I was experiencing this. So because I'm very in tune with my body, which basically I've always been in tune. So part of me wasn't. I had to learn it through physical therapy. And that's because a lot of tension is present in the muscles in order to stabilize the joints. I mean, if the tendons can't do their work because the ligaments are not up to par, then something needs to take over. And, the body and the brain, we as a human species, it's amazing what can be done. And by the way, of course, that doesn't just apply to human beings, but of course also to animals, plants, you name it, nature in general. So why wouldn't we be just as flexible and adaptable? Now, of course, I realize that it takes time for us to change. I don't know if it's true, but they actually said that the thumbs are changing from the current generations because of the phone. Haven't checked that one, but that's the story. But yes, we do change over time. Now, a lot of people may say, I cannot change. The older they get, I've always done it like this, we cannot change. I absolutely do not agree, because if there's something that I've learned is we can change. Maybe it gets harder when we're getting older because we are getting less flexible. We do more on what we actually know and what we remember, so based on experience. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we cannot learn new things. The question is, do we want to learn new things and approach things from a different perspective? Now, nowadays we have the brain games, of course, whether it's on apps or whether it's the puzzle books, things, there's so much more nowadays. That's one of the perks of the whole IT age. So there's more possible than we think. And the question is, do we want to keep on learning? Because basically it is good for the brain when we keep on learning and when we keep on learning about ourselves, but also about others. And the journaling by itself and also reading about certain things. But yes, like I said, also the puzzles, they all give us some kind of information which helps us age with a little more ease. I mean, I realized that certain processes can't be stopped, but we can, to a degree, slow them down. The question, of course, is, are we willing to adapt? In my case, like I said, I need to, for one, being someone who has a problem with people telling me specifically what to do, as in a controlling manner. This time you need to be in, this is what you need to do. No, you can't take a break. If you close your eyes, what's wrong with you? They tell you you're not a team player while you have organized lunch or did something else, but well, you weren't there on the first day of the new year. Things like that. Well, when those sudden changes are there, I don't cope very well with them. So at some point I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done working for a boss. I am going to do it myself. Now I have to tell you, this is easier said, literally said than done. The starting to work for yourself is not that hard. It's what comes after. But apart from that, it's again about how much are you willing to invest, not just money-wise, but also time-wise, but also when it comes to being willing to learn and adapt to new things. Now, if you also take in consideration that this is not just about neurodivergence not dealing really well with working during daytime, because a lot of them are like me. Creative people are often awake during the night because they're less distracted, because it's quiet, and we sort of, when input comes from outside, whether it has to do with sounds or light or whatever it is, that input distracts us. So for instance, when I went to the beauty specialist, I already knew that I was going to sleep afterwards. And yeah, a few hours later, that's when I drifted off, and I think I dozed off for like 3 hours or something. And it was completely as expected, because I know by now how I react to changes. And the body, not just the body, but the brain has to deal, so basically process what has been happening physically. It's kind of interesting when you learn about it. My sister did, well, she's a therapist, and it's called Feldenkrais. That's what it's called, Feldenkrais. And she told me that just minimal adjustments, for instance, in the way that you stand on your feet or how you turn an arm, already have big impact on the brain. And I can agree, that's true. So when you combine the two things, having to adjust to be able to work on time, as in what's expected in society, which I can understand, because, well, you do want to work together and be able to call one another at certain windows of time. Then again, it does work out on my end. It's not always easy, but in the morning, you cannot reach me. At the beginning of the afternoon, you still can't reach me. So the times that you can reach me, something is going on. Take the input. Are you sitting next to a window? Are you sitting surrounded by other people who are on the phone. Nowadays, and I don't know how I did it in the past, but nowadays, if I hear someone on the other end of the line and they have other people surrounding them, so I hear multiple people speaking, I get distracted. But that's a good way to basically explain it. So sometimes we have cubicles, then you're probably not getting any daylight because, well, it's a cubicle. But all those little changes and all that input can actually drain people's energy. So take in consideration, you have to get up at a time you may not want, then people are not listening to what you're saying. They're demanding you to play guitar on the piano. That's how I always explained it. And then when you need the time to process certain things, and that could also be just to give your eyes the realization that it's okay not to look at the screen, but actually just close your eyes so they can recalibrate again. There's that word. And others are going to say, hey, are you all right? And then, of course, what happens? You don't do it anymore. Of course, back then, I could have explained to the person, the team manager, listen, I'm doing this, first of all, because it has been advised that I do it like every 10 minutes, every hour. But apart from that, I'm doing it because I reset my focus and it helps me to process certain things. So when I do open my eyes again, I feel a lot better. Those are things that I am teaching other people now because I had to learn to speak up because I couldn't walk and stand on 2 feet for a long while. And now, of course, other things are at play too. So I still need to speak up and do so with clarity. And I can tell you that clarity, don't take it too lightly. I mean, not that it always has to be about very serious topics, but just to give you an idea. When we talk about a latte, it's officially latte macchiato, then depending on where you are, you might get this heaps of coffee and a little bit of milk, or you get lots of milk and a little bit of coffee. It varies which country you are in. So I usually say, can you give me half a shot of espresso in the latte? Now, twice it has happened now that people actually give me the full amount of espresso in the latte, and then they give me on the side half a shot of espresso. And then I look at them and I said, well, I asked for half a shot of espresso. Yeah, that's here. I said, I meant in the latte. And now I need more milk foam because I don't like it when it's that strong. So nowadays, I've learned to say, so I want milk with a little bit of coffee. That makes more sense. And even then, when I go to certain places where I know they know the recipe by now, if someone orders it, then all of a sudden, there's this cup with half an espresso on there. And I'm like, I don't want this. So what did you put in my latte? So clarity in communication is not, we have to improve ourselves. We have to try, see what works and what doesn't work. When it comes to the EDS, it's no different. When it comes to neurodivergence, it's no different. And in this case, learning by talking to AIs, but also to specialists, is actually teaching me a lot of things that they don't know outside of their fields, but because I am curious by nature, and it actually says so in all the reports, like patient is very curious about everything, wants to know it all. But they have limited areas of expertise. So, and I need to combine it all because it's all linked together. And well, today I found another piece of the puzzle, and actually that makes me very hopeful. If there are some things in here that resonate with you, whether it's because you are, say, a team member, or maybe you are an entrepreneur, maybe you're a solopreneur, maybe you have a team, and you're like, well, I don't know if I can change, and I don't know if I can see things in a positive light. Remember that I do have the Rewrite Your Inner Story challenge for you. It's back on again. You can find it. I can put a description in. I can put a link in the description, not the description in the link. That's technically it's possible, by the way. But yeah, I need to put a link in the description. So you can have a 7-day challenge. Each assignment is there for 3 days. And you can actually learn by doing something every day to look at things from a different perspective and also apply them in a different way. And, just try it. What do you have to lose? If you already are saying to yourself, well, this isn't going to work, then it's about time that you start journaling a little bit. And maybe you don't want to do so either. So maybe talk to some other people, friends of yours, people you trust. Because you might be surprised what actually is possible. And maybe you will start to believe it when someone you trust actually tells you, well, now you mention it, I've experienced, and then they come with their story. Now I realize that whether you are someone who's working for someone or you are your own boss, which quite often might be the result, not just of sheer curiosity and because you like certain things better, which you cannot do when being paid by someone, it often is also the result of not being able to deal very well with the norm or the control. But, depending on how much you need the money and do not know how to generate it yourself, you either stay working for someone or at some point you're so done, you make it work. And that's basically how things work. And when you are an entrepreneur, then all of a sudden you are in a position where you also need to learn to communicate with others. Well, basically, you also need to do it when you are an employee. And to give you an example, I've been talking to someone recently. She's got a new manager for a while now. And recently we had these holidays over here. And well, since I talk to her regularly, I said, have you already spoken to the other managers? And she said, no, because we had those holidays. And I said, well, don't wait. You need to stand up for yourself. And I can already sense that you are changing things, that you are changing yourself. And it's not like you to no longer, how do I say it? She's someone who got a lot of responsibility because she took the responsibility and the manager saw it and they applauded it. And, if she came up with certain things were discussed and then sure, you go ahead. And now there's all of a sudden this other manager, this new one, who is a very controlling figure. She doesn't care about the history of things. and how things have been done. It's her way or the highway, basically. And I said, you are no longer speaking to the other people you used to speak to, because she is so controlling that she talks to you about who you have been speaking to. She checks your calendars, she checks what you're doing, who you are talking to, and then she gets back to you. I said, that's not going to work. Now, is it? Because she is scaring you. And before you know it, this can actually lead to other people no longer believing you. And maybe they need you, the person they always trusted, because when you wanted to take certain responsibilities or you worked on certain things, they applauded you and they say, yes, go do it. And then all of a sudden, you don't do it anymore. And of course, they know something is going on. But if you don't speak up, then what can they do? Now, fortunately for me, she did speak up and things are changing. But I still remember that day when I was dealing with new management, and basically the same thing was happening. That's why I talked about not being a team player, even though I had organized brunch like a week earlier during Christmas time. And then when it was the new year, I wasn't there to say hello to everyone because I already had organized Christmas brunch. And well, who cares about when I say Happy New Year? I mean, I'll do it on the chat. And at some point, I realized that this person was trying to get rid of me. So I had to go to the CEO and say, I feel like someone is trying to blame me for a number of things. And then he admitted, yes, that's true. And I said, well, you were the one who asked me to come work for you. So who do you believe? I haven't changed all of a sudden, but here's a new guy. And then he agreed with me, and that person was no longer a manager the next day. So when you say, I can't change because you've already talked about certain things one time, and ask yourself, is it true? Is it true that you cannot change? Or maybe you can, but you've given up. And that's why this challenge is so important, because it talks to your inner story, your mindsets, what you believe about yourself, what you've heard from others, and what you've started to repeat to yourself at some point in life. And well, actually, if you sign up, you can also sign up for a handout which gets into communication guidelines related to what it is that you want to achieve or what you want help others to achieve, which can be related to the business, but also to personal goals. All things considered, the roadmap related to rewriting your inner story has to do with thriving. And the handout also has to do with thriving, because even though we might not see it that way, we are part of a whole. We are part of a network. Even when we feel left out and we feel like no one is listening to us, if we didn't have the other people around us, it would be kind of hard to survive on our own. And of course, depending on where you live, things are different. But if you live in a Western society, in a city, then chances are that you need to go to a grocery store in order to get things. That if you want to have certain foods, that you need to go elsewhere, go to market, and that if you want to have dinner and you don't want to cook yourself, that you do have to maybe speak up about what it is you want and what you don't want. So I can name a list of things that require you to communicate with clarity, and that includes speaking up with clarity, also speaking up about what you don't understand. Now, today was about flexibility and about adaptability. I've talked about the brain and how the brain actually has something which is called neuroplasticity, such a nice word. So basically, certain areas of the brain can take over certain brain functions, which normally are located at different side of the brain, or at least in a different area. It's about learning to adapt. Like I said, when I look at sheet music and I see the keys, then at some point things make sense. Take away the sheet music and things change straight away. So it depends on whether I actually see it still in front of my eyes, even though it isn't there, or I've never seen it on paper at all. And then I need to listen to the sound in order to relate it to the keys. And then when it's half a note off, then of course that creates havoc, at least on my end. But when I change things by doing it with the keyboard, by doing it with sheet music, by looking at Duolingo and singing along with Duolingo, things of course are different. And now I found a new system, the vibrations in my abdominal area. And like I said, I'm very excited about that. So my question to you is, which options have you explored? Have you checked out if certain things that you have picked up on related to one area might actually help you in a different area as well? Just by looking at things and really letting them sink in, you might actually pick up on some things that might really, really, really help you out. So just write a question down. What is it that I would like to change? What have I picked up on recently? Make a little list. If you don't know, maybe you run into something, type it in on your phone and put it on the list. But be more aware of it. When you are aware, then suddenly things stand out. And what I would like for you is to be able to adapt to this changing society. And again, you can of course say, why should I? But the question is, why not take advantage of changing times? Why only see the negative of it? And of course, I'm not going to say that some things shouldn't be happening at all, because they shouldn't be. But there are some things out there which actually can work for us. So how about looking at those things and turning them into your favor? So again, if you want to do the Rewrite Your Inner Story Challenge, then make sure to check out the link in the description. And you can click on it and just see what you come up with. And remember this, if you feel like you're stuck when it comes to communication with someone, talk to other people, see what they say, because you're never alone. But it is about taking that first step. No matter how small, it starts with that very first step.